Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My ex and I were together for 2 years. We moved in together after about 8 months, and things seemed pretty good. We had our routine down. I worked from home doing graphic design, and he worked at some tech startup downtown. I was the one who handled most of our shared expenses because I made more money, including our streaming services. Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, the whole package. He'd always joke about being my kept man but never offered to split the bills evenly. About 6 months ago, I started noticing some weird stuff. He'd be on his phone more, staying late at work, and just acting different. You know that gut feeling when something's off? Yeah, I had that. But I trusted him, so I didn't push it too hard. Then came the night that changed everything. I was working late on a client project when I heard his phone buzzing on the coffee table. He was in the shower, and the screen lit up with a text from someone named Ashley. The preview showed a message about how she couldn't wait to see him tomorrow, and that last night was amazing. When he got out of the shower, I confronted him. At first, he tried to lie, saying Ashley was just a coworker, but I'm not stupid. And eventually, the truth came out. He'd been seeing her for 3 months. 3 whole months while we were living together, sharing a bed, and I was paying for everything. The breakup was messy, lots of crying, lots of accusations. He tried to blame me, saying I worked too much and didn't pay enough attention to him. Classic cheater behavior, right? He moved out that weekend, taking his stuff and leaving me with all the bills and a broken heart. About 2 weeks after he moved out, I was settling in for a Netflix binge session to help deal with the heartbreak. I opened up the app and noticed something weird. There was a new profile that definitely wasn't mine. It was called My Profile and had some generic avatar. I clicked on it out of curiosity. This guy had the nerve to create his own profile on my Netflix account. Not only that, but he was watching all our old shows, the ones we used to watch together every week. Stranger Things, The Crown, even that cooking show we discovered together. He was continuing our shows without me, on my dime like nothing had happened. I sat there staring at the screen, absolutely furious. The audacity was unbelievable. He cheated on me, broke my heart, moved out, and then just casually kept using my streaming services like we were still together. Like he was entitled to them because we used to share them. My first instinct was to immediately change the password and lock him out. But then I had a better idea. A much more satisfying idea. Instead of kicking him off right away, I decided to have a little fun first. I renamed his profile from My Profile to Cheater. Then I went into the parental controls and switched his profile to toddler mode. No mature content, no violence, nothing but kids shows. Peppa Pig, Blue's Clues, Teletubbies, the works. I set the maximum parental restrictions I could find. For the final touch, I changed his avatar from the generic one he picked to this sad cartoon monkey with droopy eyes. It was perfect. I left it like that for a few days, wondering if he'd notice. Part of me hoped he'd try to watch something and get confused by all the cartoon recommendations. Sure enough, 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from him. He sent me a message asking if I was being serious about what I'd done to his profile. I texted back telling him that yes, I was completely serious. The satisfaction was incredible. After everything he put me through, this small act of petty revenge felt so good. He'd used my account to watch our shows, so now he could enjoy Peppa Pig instead. But I wasn't done yet. After sending that text, I immediately went to Netflix and changed the password. Then I blocked his number. If he wanted to watch grown-up TV shows, he could get his own account and pay for it himself. I found out later through a mutual friend that he'd tried to create a new Netflix account but got frustrated with the cost. Apparently, he'd been complaining to people about how unreasonable I was being. Can you believe that? He cheated on me and somehow I was the unreasonable one for not wanting to pay for his entertainment. The mutual friend also mentioned that he'd been trying to get back together with me through other people, saying it was just a mistake and he missed us. But honestly, after seeing how entitled he felt to my Netflix account, I realized this was probably just the tip of the iceberg. If he felt entitled to my streaming services after cheating, what else did he think he deserved? These days, I'm doing great. I've got my apartment to myself, I'm watching whatever I want on my Netflix account, and I don't have to worry about someone else messing up my recommendations with their terrible taste in reality TV. Last week, I started watching Bridgerton, and it's absolutely amazing. I can pause whenever I want, rewatch scenes, and enjoy it in complete peace without anyone complaining about boring period dramas. I've been working in customer service for about 15 years now, and let me tell you, I've seen some stuff. But this story takes me back to when I was in my late 20s, working as a call center supervisor for one of those massive telecommunications companies. You know the type, the ones that have their customer service centers in giant office buildings that look like they were designed by someone who hates both workers and customers. I'd started at the company as a regular customer service rep right out of college, spent 3 years taking angry calls about internet outages and cable bills before they promoted me to supervisor. I was pretty excited about the promotion at first. More money, better benefits, and I thought I'd finally get some respect. The call center I worked in had about 8 supervisors total, and I quickly realized I was the odd one out. See, almost all of my colleagues were heavy smokers. I'm talking people who went through a pack or more per day. Me? I'd never touched a cigarette in my life. My dad had died of lung cancer when I was in high school, so smoking was never something I was interested in trying. Our manager had set up this system where one supervisor always had to be visible on the call center floor during business hours. Made sense in theory, someone needed to be there for escalations, to help reps with difficult customers, and just to make sure everything was running smoothly. But here's where it got tricky. We also had all our regular supervisor duties to handle: performance reviews, call monitoring, one-on-one meetings with our team members, and a bunch of administrative stuff that required focus and quiet time. I had the largest team too, with usually 22 or 23 customer service reps reporting to me. The other supervisors had teams of 15 to 18 people. When I asked why my team was so big, my manager just said I was efficient and could handle the extra workload. Translation: they were dumping more work on me because I actually did my job. The problem became obvious pretty quickly. Every time I tried to schedule time to work on performance reviews or sit down for coaching sessions with my team members, I'd look around and realize I was the only supervisor on the floor. Where was everyone else? Out smoking. Again. At first, I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but I started paying attention and it was ridiculous. These people were going out for smoke breaks constantly, not just during their scheduled lunch breaks, but throughout the entire day. And they weren't quick 5-minute breaks either. They'd be out there for 20, sometimes 30 minutes at a time, just chatting and smoking. Meanwhile, I'm stuck on the floor dealing with every single escalation, every angry customer who demanded to speak to a supervisor, every technical issue that came up. I was basically doing my job and covering for everyone else's too. I started having to stay late just to get my actual supervisor work done. The reviews, the coaching, all the stuff that actually mattered for my team's performance. It was exhausting and honestly, pretty frustrating. I was putting in way more hours than anyone else. My team was suffering because I couldn't give them the attention they needed, and I was starting to resent the whole situation. After about 2 months of this, I decided to talk to my manager. I figured she probably didn't realize how unbalanced things had gotten, and if I just brought it to her attention, she'd handle it quietly. Maybe have a word with the other supervisors about managing their break times better. I went into her office on a Tuesday morning and laid out the situation. I explained how I was constantly the only supervisor on the floor, how I was working late to catch up on my other duties, and how it was affecting my ability to manage my team effectively. She listened, nodded along, and said she'd look into it. I walked out of that meeting feeling pretty good about myself. Problem identified, solution in progress, right? Wrong. So very wrong. The next week we had our regular supervisor meeting. All 8 of us crammed into the small conference room next to my manager's office. I'm expecting maybe a general reminder about break schedules or something subtle like that. Instead, my manager stood up and told us that she knew we all had a busy job and sometimes the workload could seem imbalanced. But she wanted everyone to understand that the smoking supervisors were just taking their lunch hour in shorter intervals throughout the day instead of all at once. So really, it all worked out in the end. She'd basically just told the entire room that I complained about the smoking breaks and then completely dismissed my concerns. Worse, she'd made it sound like the smokers were somehow being more efficient by breaking up their lunch time. The other supervisors were looking at me with these smug little smiles, like they'd just gotten official permission to keep doing exactly what they were doing. And technically, they had. I sat there for the rest of that meeting just fuming. When we got out, a couple of the other supervisors made comments about how some people just didn't understand work-life balance and how rigid some people could be about schedules. That night, I went home and told my roommate about the whole situation. He just laughed and said that if I couldn't beat them, I should join them. He was joking, but it got me thinking. The next morning, I stopped at a convenience store on my way to work and bought a pack of cigarettes. I'd never smoked before, but how hard could it be? I figured I'd just carry them around and pretend to smoke when I went out with the others. Around 10 in the morning, I saw one of my colleagues heading toward the exit. Perfect timing. I asked if I could join him and mentioned that I could use a smoke break. He seemed surprised and asked when I'd started smoking. I told him I'd been thinking about starting for stress relief. He just shrugged and we headed outside to the designated smoking area. I pulled out my pack, trying to look casual about it. He offered to light my cigarette for me, which was helpful since I had no idea what I was doing. I stood there with the lit cigarette in my hand, occasionally bringing it close to my mouth, but not actually inhaling. I figured as long as it looked like I was smoking, that was good enough. We were out there for about 25 minutes, just chatting about work stuff. When we came back in, I made a big show of washing my hands and using some breath spray. I had to commit to the bit, right? But here's the thing. I started timing these breaks. Every time someone went out to smoke, I noted when they left and when they came back, and the numbers were absolutely insane. One supervisor went out 6 times in a single 8-hour shift, staying out for an average of 22 minutes each time. That's over 2 hours of smoke breaks in one day. Another supervisor averaged 5 breaks per day, but stayed out longer, sometimes up to 35 minutes at a time. And this was every single day. I started going out with them every time, fake cigarette in hand, timing everything. I also started bringing small snacks with me instead of taking a traditional lunch break. Crackers, granola bars, fruit, stuff I could eat while standing around outside. Nobody questioned it. They just accepted that I'd suddenly become a smoker. A few of them even gave me advice about different cigarette brands and smoking techniques. I just nodded along and kept timing their breaks. After about 3 weeks of this, I documented that the smoking supervisors were collectively taking an extra 10 to 12 hours of break time per week beyond their scheduled lunch periods. And since I was now smoking too, I was taking the same amount of break time they were. That's when my manager started noticing. She saw me heading out for another smoke break one day and mentioned that it was my 3rd one that day. I told her that I decided to start smoking and reminded her that she'd said smoke breaks were just taking lunch hours in shorter intervals. It all worked out in the end, right? She got this look on her face like she'd just realized she'd been trapped, because that's exactly what had happened. If she tried to limit my smoke breaks, she'd have to limit everyone else's too. And if she timed my breaks, she'd have to time theirs as well. I was just following the precedent she'd set. She'd explicitly said that smoke breaks were just lunch breaks taken in smaller chunks. So that's exactly what I was doing. This went on for about a month. Every day I'd go out with whoever was smoking, standing there with my fake cigarette, timing their breaks, and taking the same amount of time they were taking. I was getting more break time than I'd ever had before, and I was finally not the only supervisor stuck on the floor all day. But the real victory came when my manager called another supervisor meeting. She told us that she'd been reviewing our floor coverage and thought we needed to make some changes. Starting the following week, they were going to implement a new system where supervisors needed to coordinate their break times to ensure they always had adequate coverage on the floor. The room went dead silent. All the smoking supervisors were looking at each other with these shocked expressions. She continued by explaining that they'd have a sign-up sheet for break times, and everyone would be limited to their scheduled lunch period plus 2 additional 15-minute breaks per day. One of the supervisors spoke up and asked about their smoking breaks, reminding her that she'd said those were just lunch breaks taken in shorter intervals. My manager replied that the new system would make sure everyone's break time was properly managed and fairly distributed. I had to bite my lip to keep from grinning. She couldn't admit that she'd been wrong about the smoking breaks without looking like an idiot, but she also couldn't let the situation continue now that she realized how much work time was being lost. The new system went into effect the following Monday, and suddenly everyone was taking normal lunch breaks and reasonable break times. The constant stream of people heading outside for smoke breaks stopped. I was finally able to get my actual work done during normal business hours instead of staying late every night. I quietly threw away my pack of cigarettes and never had to pretend to smoke again. Mission accomplished. The other supervisors were pretty salty about the whole thing for a while. They knew I'd basically forced the new policy by gaming their system, but they couldn't really complain about it without admitting they'd been taking excessive break time in the first place. My manager never said anything to me directly about it, but I could tell she knew exactly what I'd done. My dad had a heart attack when I was younger, and watching the paramedics work on him made me want to help people in medical situations. That experience taught me to recognize the signs of serious medical emergencies, which turned out to be more important than I ever imagined. The store gets all kinds of customers, and I've dealt with my fair share of difficult people: shoplifters, angry customers, people trying to return obviously stolen items, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what happened last Tuesday during the afternoon rush. I was doing my usual patrol near the electronics section when I heard a commotion by the main entrance. A middle-aged man had collapsed right in front of the automatic doors. He was on the ground, his whole body jerking and convulsing. I immediately recognized what was happening. He was having a seizure, and from the way he was clutching his chest before he went down, it looked like he might be having cardiac issues too. I rushed over and got on my radio to call for an ambulance while trying to clear space around him. Other customers were gathering around, some trying to help, others just staring. The man's wife was kneeling beside him, crying and begging someone to help her husband. She kept saying he had a heart condition. I tried to calm her down and told her I had called 911 and that the paramedics were on their way. I asked her to stay calm and keep talking to him. That's when Karen showed up. She was this woman in her 50s with perfectly done hair and an expensive purse. She pushed through the small crowd that had formed around the man. Karen demanded to know what was going on and why everyone was blocking the entrance. I explained that there was a medical emergency and that paramedics were coming, and I asked her to give us some space. Karen looked down at the man who was still seizing on the floor, then back at me. She declared that he was obviously faking it. She claimed she had seen this scam before, where people pretend to have emergencies in stores to get free stuff or discounts. The man was clearly in distress, his lips were turning blue, and his wife was sobbing beside him. I told Karen this was a real medical emergency and that I needed her to step back so we could help him. Karen complained that she didn't have time for this nonsense. She said she had a hair appointment in 20 minutes and needed to get her shopping done. She demanded that we move him out of the way. The wife pleaded with her, explaining that he was really sick and had just had heart surgery last month. Karen dismissed this as a sob story and said that people like them were always looking for handouts. The man's seizure was getting worse, and I was getting more worried. I tried to keep Karen away while monitoring his condition, but she was having none of it. She insisted that she was a paying customer and demanded that I move this faker so she could get into the store properly. She actually stepped closer to the man and nudged him with her foot. I immediately moved to block her and told her not to touch him because she could seriously hurt someone having a seizure. Karen insisted he wasn't having a real seizure and said she would prove it. Before I could stop her, she actually kicked the man in his side while he was convulsing on the ground. His wife screamed and several other customers gasped in horror. The wife called her a monster and asked how she could do that to a sick person. Karen replied that he would stop pretending now that he knew his little act wasn't working. But the man didn't stop seizing. In fact, he seemed to be getting worse. I immediately called for backup and got on my radio again to update the paramedics on the situation. I told Karen that she had just assaulted someone having a medical emergency and that she wasn't going anywhere until the police got there. Karen shouted that I couldn't detain her because she was a customer. She threatened to sue the store and have my job. I positioned myself between her and the exit while trying to help the man and his wife. Other customers had started recording with their phones, which made Karen even more angry. She yelled at them to stop filming her and called it harassment. She kept insisting that the man was faking and that everyone was falling for it. The paramedics arrived about 5 minutes later, followed closely by the police. The EMTs immediately started working on the man, confirming what I already knew. He was having both a seizure and cardiac issues. They got him stabilized and loaded him into the ambulance. One of the officers approached me for a statement while his partner dealt with Karen, who was still insisting the whole thing was an act. The officer asked me to tell him what happened and I explained the whole situation. Several customers who had witnessed everything backed up my story. The officer took down their information and asked about security cameras. I told him we had cameras covering the entire entrance area and that everything should be recorded. Karen overheard this and started getting nervous. She claimed they couldn't prove anything and that it was just a misunderstanding. The officer told her that they had multiple witnesses saying she kicked a man who was having a medical emergency and that they would need to review the footage. My manager came over with the security footage on a tablet. The video clearly showed Karen kicking the man while he was seizing on the ground. There was no ambiguity about what happened. The officer told Karen she was under arrest for assault and began reading her rights. Karen screamed that this was ridiculous and that he was faking. She demanded to speak to the manager. When they led her away in handcuffs, she was still screaming about how unfair it all was and threatening to sue everyone. Several customers actually started clapping, which would have been funny if the whole situation wasn't so serious. Later I found out that the man survived his cardiac episode and seizure, though he had to stay in the hospital for several days. His wife came by the store to thank me for helping and let me know he was going to be okay. She also mentioned that they were pressing charges against Karen for assault. The store manager reviewed the footage and commended me for how I handled the situation. Corporate even sent me a letter thanking me for my professionalism during a difficult incident. Karen had been convicted of assault and received community service, a fine, and was banned from our store permanently. She also had to pay the man's medical bills that resulted from her kick, which apparently made his condition worse. My boyfriend and I have been together for a few years. We moved in together about 18 months ago, and things were great until last month when his mom had to move in with us. She's always struggled financially, but the situation got worse when his brother, who's been battling drug addiction for almost a decade, completely destroyed their living situation. His brother stole her car while high and crashed it straight into their apartment building. He nearly killed a neighbor in the process. The landlord obviously evicted them both immediately, and the brother got sent to rehab. She had nowhere else to go except our one-bedroom apartment. Before she moved in, I sat my boyfriend down and made it clear what my conditions were. She could stay with us temporarily, but she had to cut all contact with his brother and never invite him over. I was terrified he'd retaliate against us and get us evicted too. More importantly, she needed to stop enabling his drug use by constantly bailing him out. I know it sounds harsh, but after watching this cycle for years, it was the only way he'd ever get real help. My boyfriend agreed completely. He said he understood and that those rules were fair. When we told her, she nodded and said she appreciated us helping her out and would respect our home. 2 weeks later, I came home from work early and found my boyfriend and his mom laughing in the kitchen. I asked him what was so funny and his mom told me they'd just gotten back from taking her son to Golden Corral. She was giggling as she described how he was so high he kept nodding off face first into the buffet food. My boyfriend was cracking up like it was the funniest thing ever. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I asked him what they meant by taking him out to eat while he was high, and his mom casually explained that he'd called saying he was hungry, so they picked him up. I reminded them that we'd agreed on no contact, and that was the one rule I'd set. My boyfriend defended himself by saying he'd thought about it afterward and decided it was too harsh because the guy was her son after all. I pulled my boyfriend aside and told him how betrayed I felt. He'd gone behind my back and completely undermined the only boundary I'd set. Now she knew she could do whatever she wanted because he wouldn't enforce anything. His mom overheard our conversation and chimed in, telling us that we couldn't expect a mother to abandon her child and that such expectations were cruel. Within days, she started treating our apartment like her personal hotel. She'd leave dishes everywhere, and when I asked her to clean up, she'd say she was too tired. Then she started demanding we do her laundry because she claimed she didn't like using the apartment complex laundry room. She told us that we were young and had more energy, while she'd worked hard her whole life and deserved to rest. When I pointed out that we both worked full-time jobs and paid all the rent and utilities, she dismissed my concerns by saying she'd raised children and that was work too. She started inviting her son over whenever we weren't home. I'd find evidence: extra food missing, cigarette butts on our balcony, the couch cushions rearranged. When I confronted her about it, she'd completely deny everything. 3 weeks ago, when our lease renewal notice arrived, things got worse. We'd already decided not to renew and were looking at new places. She saw the paperwork and cornered us, asking where we were all moving to. She said she hoped the new place had 2 bedrooms this time because she was tired of sleeping on the couch. I stared at her and told her that she wasn't moving with us. I reminded her that this arrangement was temporary until she found housing. She argued that low-income housing lists take years, and that we couldn't just abandon family. My boyfriend looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. She continued by insisting that she'd been helping around the apartment and that the least we could do was provide stable housing. I told her that helping meant she should be cleaning and paying rent, not sneaking her son over behind our backs. She denied knowing what I was talking about and added that she shouldn't have to clean because we were younger. That night, I told my boyfriend I was looking at studio apartments for myself. He accused me of trying to destroy our relationship, but I was done enabling both of them. Last Friday, everything came to a head. I came home to find his brother passed out on our couch with drug paraphernalia on our coffee table. His mom was in the kitchen acting like nothing was wrong. I immediately called the police and reported the drugs. When they arrived, they found enough to charge him with possession. His mom started screaming at me, calling me heartless and vindictive. She demanded to know how I could do this to family and accused me of ruining everything. I told her that I'd warned her what would happen if she brought drugs into our home. The police arrested her son, and I told his mom she had 24 hours to pack and leave. My boyfriend tried to protest, but I'd already signed the lease on my studio apartment. She moved in with some distant cousin, and my boyfriend is staying with a friend while he figures things out. He keeps texting me, begging me to reconsider, but I'm done being manipulated. I found out yesterday that she's been telling everyone we kicked her out for no reason, and that we're horrible people. But her cousin called me to thank me because apparently she's already trying to take over their house and demanding they do her chores too. Some people never learn. The shop I worked at was nothing fancy. We handled business cards, flyers, banners, and the occasional wedding invitation. The owner was rarely around, so most of the time it was just me and my manager running the place. My manager was this guy in his mid-40s who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He had this permanent scowl and treated every question like it was a personal attack on his intelligence. Every time I asked for clarification on an order, every time I needed approval for something, every time I even said good morning, he'd let out this dramatic sigh like I was ruining his entire existence. I actually tried to be a good employee. I showed up on time, stayed late when needed, and genuinely cared about doing quality work. But this guy made it impossible to feel confident about anything. When I'd ask questions about priorities or procedures, he'd act like I was the biggest inconvenience in the world. The breaking point came on a Monday morning in March. We had just received two orders that needed attention. One was from a small law firm that needed business cards by Thursday for a networking event. They'd called it urgent and were willing to pay a rush fee. The other was a batch of 500 real estate flyers that were part of our regular weekly orders. Nothing special, just routine work. I looked at both orders and realized I couldn't finish everything by the deadlines if I didn't prioritize. So I did what any reasonable employee would do and asked my manager for guidance. I approached him and explained that I needed to know which order to prioritize. I told him about the urgent business cards from the law firm and the real estate flyers, and that I couldn't get both done in time. He looked up from his computer with that familiar, irritated expression and let out the longest sigh I'd ever heard from him. He asked me if I seriously couldn't figure this out myself. I explained that I just wanted to make sure I was handling the priorities correctly. I mentioned that the law firm was paying rush fees, but I knew the real estate client was important too. He told me he didn't have time to hold my hand through every little decision and that I should figure it out myself. He said I didn't need to run everything by him like I was some kind of child. I tried one more time, saying I just wanted to make sure I was making the right choice for the business. He asked if I hadn't heard what he just said and repeated that I should figure it out myself. He told me to stop bothering him with every tiny detail and to use my brain for once. So I did exactly what he said. I used my brain. The law firm was paying rush fees. They had specifically called their order urgent, and good customer service meant taking care of clients who were willing to pay extra for priority service. It seemed like the obvious business decision. I spent Monday and Tuesday working on the business cards. They were actually pretty complex, with embossed lettering and a special matte finish. I put in extra hours to make sure they were perfect, and they turned out great. The law firm picked them up Wednesday morning and were thrilled with the quality. Wednesday afternoon, I was just starting on the real estate flyers when my manager came storming out of his office. He was holding his phone like he wanted to throw it against the wall. He demanded to know where the flyers for the real estate office were. I told him I was working on them and they'd be ready by Friday. He said Friday wasn't good enough because they were supposed to be ready today. I explained that the order form said Friday and that I had prioritized the urgent business cards like he told me to. He said he never told me to delay these flyers. I reminded him that I had asked him which order to prioritize, and he had told me to figure it out myself. So I prioritized the urgent order that was paying rush fees. He said I should have known these flyers were important because the real estate agent was his friend, and the guy had been calling him all morning wondering where his order was. And there it was, the real reason he was upset. This wasn't about business priorities or customer service. It was about his personal relationship with the real estate agent. I told him I had figured it out myself, just like he said. I explained that the law firm was paying rush fees for urgent service, so I prioritized their order and asked if that wasn't good business sense. He told me not to get smart with him and said I should have asked him before making that decision. I reminded him that he had specifically told me not to run everything by him. I said he had told me I should figure it out myself and stop bothering him with every tiny detail. He stared at me for a long moment, clearly realizing he was caught in his own contradiction. His friend had probably given him an earful about the delayed flyers, and now he was trying to blame me for following his exact instructions. He finally said that from now on I should double check with him first, just in case. I told him I understood and that I'd make sure to run everything by him just in case. The next few weeks were pretty interesting. Every single decision, no matter how small, I brought to him first. Paper choice for a simple flyer? I asked him. Color settings for a basic print job? I asked him. Whether to use the standard or premium cardstock for business cards? I asked him. He started getting frustrated with all my questions, but every time he showed signs of irritation, I'd remind him that he wanted me to double-check everything with him first, just in case. The irony was beautiful. He went from complaining that I asked too many questions to being overwhelmed by the very questions he demanded I ask. The real estate agent never did get an explanation for why his flyers were late. My manager couldn't exactly tell his friend that he'd given unclear instructions to his employee and then blame the employee when things went wrong. Instead, He had to eat the cost of reprinting the flyers with a rushed turnaround to keep his friend happy. I ended up leaving that job about 3 months later when I found a better position at a different firm. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.